Week 20 of Aon's Public Affairs podcast was recorded August 18th, 2020.
Hello and welcome to the Aon's Public Affairs podcast. Daniel Serota out of Chicago, Illinois. I am excited to be joined week 20, episode 20, with the man, Joe Monaghan, my good friend and a partner in crime in D.C., CEO of Public Sector Partnership Practice. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here. I am joining from the kids' television room and also the laundry room, but it is also my office.
Well, I mean, it's the new better. It's the new work from home. And, you know, it kind of is what it is. But, Joe, you've been busy. Let's dig in here because I think I'm excited about this topic because you and I have been thinking about this for a long time during this pandemic. And I want to get your sense because of COVID. We're in a pandemic. What are states thinking about here? And, you know, budget is such an important aspect. What are they looking at?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. It's, you know, someone I was talking earlier today said 2020 is 2008 and the 1968 and 1918 all rolled into one year. It's a very challenging year. And it's also a year where at all levels of government, we're calling on our governments in a way that we've never done before. At a time where they are not only enormously challenged in navigating COVID from the, public health standpoint, but also how do you navigate it as an institution? How do you navigate working from home if you're operating a government agency? And at the same time, they're looking at the state and local level, especially at significant challenges in their revenues. And so you have all of these things coming together at the same time, and we're still struggling in really understanding the duration of this, the ultimate magnitude of this. So it is very, very challenging time for all of these state and local governments.
And Joe, it is a challenging time. We're seeing in D.C. that additional funding could be possible. We've seen it in the HEROES Act from the Democrats providing state and local funding. We saw it in the GOP proposal recently in D.C. They just came out with a skinny one today that had a little bit of some state and local funding. You know, if state and local governments have funding, what do they use it towards? What are some of the bottom line things that you see, states being able to use some of these dollars?
Yeah, so, if you start from the shortfall standpoint, what's interesting if we focus on states is there's a lot of variance from states in terms of the sources of their revenue. So if you look at two large states, for example, California and Florida, both of which are struggling with, large COVID outbreaks, and both of which have large populations, but they have different sources in terms of their revenue. You have in California, the vast majority of their revenue, over 50% of their revenue comes from taxes on the top 1% of income earners. So an impact in terms of the stock market declines that we saw earlier in the year, impact in terms of unemployment for some segments of the economy, but especially that earlier stock market decline can really impact California. In Florida, they don't have income tax. They're much more reliant on things like sales tax. And a lot of their tax revenue comes, for example, from tourism. And you don't have, for example, Disney World operating at nearly the level it was operating beforehand. Then you have all the knock-on effects from that. So when these states talk about the additional funding and where they could use it, frankly, they're having huge strains on their infrastructure. If you think about the state we live in, Daniel, Illinois, huge challenges with IDES, the unemployment office, on just operating with the volume of unemployment claims. We've seen that nationwide. Systems challenges, people challenges. How do you work if you work in an infrastructure where usually you have people together in an office, managing these claims? Well, how on earth do you do that with social distancing? And if you don't have the technology infrastructure? But these budget shortfalls are so significant that when they get these revenues, they're immediately going to be redeploying them for needs right now. Social services are going up because people are unemployed. People, even if they are working hourly, they're working fewer hours. The demands on the healthcare system are increased. And so that cash is going to immediately be redeployed to help solve some of those challenges.
And Joe, I know you have conversations with governors, leaders across the country, around Aon's resources, Aon United, what we can bring to public sector in a wide vast of issues. What are some of the conversations you're having with governors, and how is that impacted because of COVID?
Well, it's interesting because, one of the things that we've been talking to states and localities about for the better part of a year now is a concept called budget insurance, which frankly, in many respects, isn't more complicated than it sounds. It's there to protect you, if you're a state, for example, if your revenues go below a certain threshold. So go back a year when we formed the public sector partnership. Aon, Daniel, as you know, global firm. We work with over 3,500 public institutions all over the world. We do all kinds of different things, from insurance, reinsurance, help them with talent assessment, help them with cyber solutions, with health programs, actuarial assessments, many different things that we do with governments. If you think about public pension plans, how we help them manage those. And when you look at all the work that Aon does, the reason we started the partnership was to bring all of that together. So we're getting those global insights. We're actually collecting that, and we're thinking about what we're learning from it so we can help public entities improve. We can create greater resiliency in their mission. But what we're also doing is bringing the whole firm together around these clients and starting first and foremost with thinking of the public sector and the unique needs that they have, rather than taking a solution that might work for a commercial enterprise and then shifting it a bit to modify it to fit into public sector. We're starting with the first principle of focusing on the unique needs that public sectors have. And this is the thing about COVID. And I don't know if there's been anything like it. All institutions, public and private, almost all individuals, all over the world are going through COVID. We're all going through this, and it is stressing all institutions. It's stressing individuals. It's stressing families. But we are going to learn so much coming out of this. And the important thing is to collect those lessons learned, take all the good things we've learned, because we're adapting, institutions are adapting, individuals are adapting, communities are adapting. Take the good things that we're learning from this and see how we can apply them, those lessons, more programmatically, so that we're creating a more resilient public infrastructure going forward. Because if you're a state or you're a locality, you want to do the things, you want to make the investments that are going to improve outcomes, improve the lives of your citizens going forward. You're excited about the investments that are going to change things for your city or state in the next 10 years. What happens in a crisis is that investment for the future has to wait because you got to solve the crisis. And if it waits, now it's 15 years or 20 years. So that's why a solution like budget insurance is great, because it fills the gap so that you can continue to make these investments that are going to create a better future 10 years from now. It gives you the resources, the liquidity to meet the crisis today by amplifying your resources so that you can continue to invest in the future.
I mean, Joe, first of all, couldn't agree more with that. And I do think states are going to have to start thinking about that more broadly and really being prepared and thinking about the long tail risk and staying resilient, right, during any type of crises, to being able to prepare for the future of what is to come. And I want to also dig in on, where do you see other, opportunities to get created? And I think you hit it. There's been a lot of things we've learned from and a lot of good things that have actually happened from this pandemic. Where do you see other opportunities that could come out?
Yeah, well, an area that we are particularly focused on as a firm now is around talent. And I think institutions broadly are struggling with attracting and retaining talent. We are all learning how to work differently and what the future of work will look like, the environment of work, what is the workplace, our interactions, our mobility. all of that will evolve. Governments are no different in the need to attract talent. And one of the things that is coming out of COVID, I think, and this is just my personal opinion, is the recognition that when you have massive events like COVID, that you are reliant on government to come in and fill gaps. Now, what we also see is the speed and pace of innovation that can happen at private institutions. And so, how do you learn from both of that? And when you think about talent, we have a business that is about assessing talent, retaining talent. If you're a public institution, how do you attract and retain talent so that you can be dynamic and nimble and change? And how do you have to change as an institution? How do you have to be more flexible in a workplace environment? How do you have to be more flexible with your work hours? Governments are already doing some of this, flex time and things like that. But this is an area where I think we're seeing a lot of opportunity to engage with the public sector because we're taking lessons learned from the private sector, what's working, what's not working. And we're saying, right, from that, can we draw conclusions based upon the needs of public institutions? They have safety and protocol needs that they have to meet. And how can we apply some of those lessons appropriately to help public institutions adapt, attract, and retain talent so they can have better outcomes and higher impact going forward?
Well, and digging in on the public sector side of it, we've seen civil unrest stuff happen, Chicago especially, Joe, in our backyard here, with looting and other things that have happened over these past couple of weeks. COVID's impacted, to your point. Where do you see maybe some opportunities in police and fire as a way? Because I think it's an interesting time we live in. What opportunities are going to be created through that?
Yeah, it is, in many respects, a very distressing time. And it's also a time of opportunity to take a step back and think about how things can be improved, how things can be better. And when we think about law enforcement and the benefits of law enforcement, I think what a lot of people are focused on is how do you make improvements in law enforcement, because you need law enforcement, you need police protection, you need your first responders. They play a vital role. But how can you make it better? How can you have better outcomes for all parties involved? And an area where Aon actually has a particularly strong track record and tools that are leading capabilities, really cutting edge technology, is around law enforcement assessment and recruiting. And it's digitally enabled assessment and recruiting, which is good for a lot of different reasons. One, you get a broader and more diverse pool of applicants by using things like a mobile device. But you also, as you go through those screening functions, one of the things that we are using is state-of-the-art psychology with state-of-the-art technology to create a pool of candidates that not only has the skills to protect, but the inclinations to serve. And you need both. We have great police and great law enforcement, and they're very difficult jobs. But you have better outcomes when you find talent that has a community orientation and a more natural inclination to be service in their orientation. And our capabilities are able to draw that out in a way that is validated statistically and at the end of the day improves outcomes. In fact, those capabilities, and we've got great teammates based in Washington, D.C. that do a lot of this work, they helped redesign the FBI's entire recruiting strategy for special agents. And the FBI wanted a broader, more diverse, more dynamic set of applicants and resulted in much better classes of special agents. And it was so successful that the FBI actually won an award for that process. So we're really excited about those capabilities. We're having great conversations with many law enforcement agencies. And it's not just police departments. You have corrections agencies, large transportation authorities across the country. They have transit police. You have obviously your sheriffs. There are many aspects of law enforcement in addition to your first responders in your fire departments around the world. And so I think that's a particular area that we're excited about because of the impact.
Well, Joe, first off, right person for the job, your leadership in this space, helping states really think through these tough times, from talent, from resiliency, from healthcare. We didn't even talk about that, but we could go all day on that stuff. I appreciate everything you are doing. Thank you for the time. Thank you for coming on to our 20th episode of the podcast. And I hope after COVID and from lessons learned, we can have you back on to talk about how we got through these tough times.
Daniel, it's been a pleasure and happy to chat whenever you'll have me.
Well, I appreciate it. And thank you all for listening. Week 20, we're going to keep going strong. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify, we're on YouTube. 5 stars, like, comment, share with your friends. Thanks for joining, and we'll be in touch next week.
This information is a resource for Aon clients and business partners. It is intended to provide general guidance of potential exposures and is not intended to provide legal, regulatory, or medical advice. Due to the dynamic nature of infectious diseases, Aon cannot be held liable for the guidance provided. We encourage listeners to seek additional information from credible sources. Thank you.